Hey there, good afternoon, and welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show that's dedicated to progressive rock, hard rock, heavy metal, and other forms of rock music. So today is the series that we've been doing, rock greats that thrilled us but since have passed on. And today honorables will be Don Kirshner of Don Kirshner's Rock Concert and Gary Moore, known primarily as the guitarist for Thin Lizzy, but also with Skid Row and on his own as well. I think he's more of a soloist than any of the previous ones mentioned. But anyways, those are the two we're doing today. And then once we do them, I will also give you a short list of honorable mentions. I think I have 9 here, 9 of them. Yeah. So anyways, we start with Don Kirshner. As you know, I generally go from those who passed first, go first. Okay, so Don Kirshner was basically an executive. He also was a producer of music, a music producer. He was known for doing a lot of the music for some television shows. Also, and a thing I think he's the most famous for is the Don Kirshner Rock Concert, which took place in the 70s and early 80s, and we'll get into that after. But those are the things he's most known for. So he was born April 17th, 1934 in New York City, in New York, in the US of A. He died on January 17, 2011 at the age of 76 in Boca Raton, Florida. At his home, I would presume. Music, he was, like I said, a record producer and a music producer. So he didn't play any instruments, but I chose him because he had a lot of influence on a lot of pretty well-known people. He was active from the 1950s right through to his death in 2011. Okay, so some of the people that he brought into music and for notable circumstances were Al Lewis, who was the owner of a record label at the time. He introduced and brought him together with Sylvester Bradford, who was an African musician. They wrote a song called Tears on My Pillows, which was released by Little Anthony and the Imperials. This was a big hit, so this was his first kind of claim to fame. From that, he went on to discover lots of musicians. Some of them included like Tony Orlando, Neil Diamond, Carole King, of course, and of course some more contemporary. Well, I don't know if they're contemporary, but more rock-oriented stuff such as Kansas. He was in charge of the Monkees TV show. He was the music producer of that, so he would get writers and musicians, and they would write songs for the show, to which the Monkees, Davy Jones, Peter Tork, Mike Nesbitt, and who's the other guy? Mickey Dolenz, of course. So those 4 were the actors on the show, and they would provide the acting as if they were playing the music. So what happened is that after a couple of seasons of this, the guys in the Monkees, there was a couple guys in the Monkees, notably Peter Tork and Mike Nesbitt, who were somewhat of musicians. They were musicians, and they wanted to play their own stuff and have a say in what kind of music they sang and actually perform the music instead of having studio musicians perform it, and they act as if they were doing it. So it was kind of an unusual television show, because even though it was a television show and there was acting, this band had kind of taken on a life of its own. Americans thought of them as a rock band, so to speak, somewhere in the same light as the Beatles were. Obviously not in the same league, but like in that same kind of light. So it was a little bit of a confusing scene. Anyways, they rebelled a bit against what was being done and wanted to do their own stuff, and they kind of locked horns a bit, and then he released a song that he had written for the Monkees, for the TV show. He released it as a single with other musicians, and that was a big no-no. And so anyways, he was dismissed from the show. So he did do some other shows at that time period, in that same kind of time period. Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie, he did the music for them as well. So that was his primarily what he did as a music executive and producer and stuff, is the scores, and I guess you would call it the music for TV shows. But then he was given an opportunity to do a time slot in which every second week he would do a kind of concert thing. And then eventually this turned into his own rock concert, and it became the Don Kirshner's rock concert. Now, I didn't know much about it back then, but I watched it all the time. This, to me, was the premier rock concert that was out there. Yeah, in the 60s there was the Ed Sullivan Show, and there was other venues. But to me, Don Kirshner's rock concerts where all the big guys went. That's the show you got to see the musicians you like. And he did that for almost 9 years. I didn't realize it was that long, but it went on from the early 70s, 1972, right through to 1981. I don't know if it happened. It went off the air in 1981. I'm not sure if it was a coincidence or not, but that was the same year that MTV started. So perhaps he was going to be pushed out anyways. But anyway, so he did that for about 9 years. He was inducted after his death, 3 years after his death, in 2014, into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for his musical contributions, and I would think primarily for all the acts that he brought to fame and fortune, and the Don Kirshner rock concert. So anyways, then he passed in 2011 from heart failure, basically. At 76 years of age, he passed away. So there's your first person tonight, Don Kirshner. I don't normally do the executives or the people surrounding rock, but I think this guy had a fairly big impact. And so I decided to pick him for this episode. Now, the second person is Irish guitar blues rock legend Gary Moore. I think Gary Moore was one of those players. I didn't get to listen to him much when I was growing up. I never even knew about him until the last year or so, when I've been watching other people's sites and they talk about him a lot, and I began to listen to his stuff. This guy was a really good guitar player. How I didn't get into him, I'm not really sure. Maybe it was just coincidence that when I was listening to Thin Lizzy and stuff like that, he wasn't in the band at that point, or he had left the band, so I wasn't aware of him. And then I never listened to. I wasn't really a rhythm and blues player listening to her when I was young. I had my period of time during the Stevie Ray Vaughan era for me, where I listened to that type of music, but for some reason I never got into him. But recently I've been taking notice of him, and I want to give him kudos here. I think he is one of the great guitar players of all time. I made this mistake with Rory Gallagher. When I did Rory Gallagher, I didn't think he was that famous, and I didn't think he was really up to some of the levels of some of the more well-known guitar players. But I've since changed my mind there, and with the egging of some people thing, I went back and listened to it and taken a different stance, and I'm not going to make that mistake twice. I think Gary Moore falls into this category. So, okay, Gary Moore was born April the 4th, 1952 in Belfast. And he lived in Belfast until just before it started becoming a bit of a violent place, and then he moved to Dublin. Anyways, he died on February the 6th, 2011 in, I may screw this up, at Estepona, Spain. He was on holidays with his girlfriend. Basically, music for Gary was blues rock, hard rock, heavy metal, and some jazz fusion in there as well. basically his main instrument, of course, was guitar, but he also sang, which he can sing. I really didn't know that he could because he never did it until he started going solo, and then he decided to do some of his own vocals, and he's quite good at it. He also plays bass and keyboards, are the other instruments. He was active from 1968 through to his death in 2011, so a fairly lengthy career. Okay, so I'm going to need my glasses for the next bit because there's a little bit of writing here. So, he was a member of Skid Row in the late 60s. That's where his music career was launched, although he did do other things before that. He was left-handed, which I understand because I'm left-handed when it comes to playing guitar as well. Part of the reason why I ended up becoming more of a drummer. I liked guitar initially and wanted to play it, but it was difficult to find left-hand guitars that suited me, and I was a little bit frustrated by it, but I switched and started playing drums and became much more happier with that. But Gary switched and started playing right-handed guitar, which, he gets full kudos for that. That's a tough job, man. Anyways, he became a right-handed guitarist. He formed his first band shortly after that called the Beat Boys, and they played primarily Beatles stuff because it was during that period of time. Around that time also he made friends with Rory Gallagher, so they knew each other. Well, stands to reason you got two guys roughly the same age, both playing the same instrument, both from the same country. Stands to reason they're going to know each other, right? He left Belfast in 1968, just around the time when the Troubles were really starting, and he moved to Dublin and joined a band called Skid Row. Okay, it was there that he befriended vocalist Phil Lynott. Now, Phil Lynott was the vocalist for Skid Row at that time, and I want to make clear here, because I didn't know this myself until I started doing this, that there was two Skid Rows. The one from Ireland that Gary Moore and Phil Lynott formed and were playing in, and the one from the US is the one that most people would probably know, kind of a heavy metal band. But anyways, there was two of them. I'm not really sure how that ended up, except for I think, based on what I've read and seen, I think the Skid Row in Ireland didn't trademark the name, and so when the one in the US put out a trademark to make sure that they had rights to use the name, they got it because there was nobody registered as that. So that's my belief in what happened. If I'm wrong, I'm sure somebody will tell me here. Okay, so anyways, when Phil Lynott left the band on a kind of a leave of absence due to medical reasons, and when he returned, the guy Brush Shells had taken over vocals and then decided that Phil Lynott should leave the band. So he asked Phil Lynott to leave the band, and he did. I think Gary Moore stayed and played with them, at least on their first album, and then he left as well and started his own solo career. And I've already discussed the controversy that was between the two Skid Rows. There was a story that Gary Moore had the rights to Skid Row and sold them to these people. And then later there was a discussion that they never had the right to take the name. And then the people who had the name said that they filed for the right to use the name, and there was no objections to it, so they assumed that name. So there's a little bit of controversy there. I'm not really sure what happened, but I think it's probably because I think that the first group of Skid Rowers didn't do that, and so then the name was still open for taking. And I could be wrong again, like I said. Okay, he played with Thin Lizzy in 1974, and then he left. He basically left because he was finding that he was drinking more and doing more drugs and getting himself in trouble, and he didn't really want that, so he left the band and went back to his solo career. But then he rejoined them again in 1977 for a bit, and they did an album, The Black Rose, and then he left the band again for basically the same thing. It was a very party-oriented band, I guess. Then they did a one-night kind of tribute concert for Phil Lynott after he died, and Gary was part of that as well. He then went solo, primarily was solo after that. He released quite a few albums, none of which I own. He's one of those artists that I've recently discovered. I've listened to a few of his things and recently discovered, and I hope to get some of his stuff to listen to and try it out a little bit more. So, but that's where I stand with Gary Moore. He did have an incident in a bar where a couple guys were making comments about his girlfriend and things that they were going to do to her and stuff like that, and he confronted them, and one of them broke a beer bottle and cut his face up pretty badly, and I think it profoundly affected him based on what I read. He had difficulty with the camera. He would always show not that part of his face, and was kind of leery of that after. So unfortunately for him, these kind of things happen, and of course the final act, of course, was he died in his sleep of a heart attack, probably alcohol-induced heart attack. He had a fairly large amount of alcohol in his system when they did the autopsy. So there you have it, Gary Moore. Now, like I said, I had an issue not understanding fully what I knew about Rory Gallagher when I did the Rory Gallagher thing, and some people corrected me, and so I went back and I listened to quite a bit of Gallagher stuff, and I stand in error, and I corrected that, and I made things, and I'm not going to do the same here with Gary Moore. I think Gary Moore, who was influenced by several well-known guitar players, also influenced a great deal of guitar players, and he seems to be very versatile in his styles. He can go from very bluesy-oriented music to very heavy metal stuff. So this is a guy who I think has a great deal of talent, and like I said, it stands to reason that him and Gallagher would be friends because they're Irish legendary guitar players playing in the same country. It only stands to reason. So I hope to discover more about Gary Moore as I go along, and I wanted to honor him today by talking about his legacy as a great rock musician and a great guitar player. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. For me, it was very eye-opening about some of the things that I didn't know, which most of these are. There's a lot of these people I chose. I didn't just choose everybody because I knew about them. I chose some people because I think they should be honored, and some people because I didn't know much about them. In some cases, it was for both, and people who were fairly well known and some not so very well known. So I've tried to be varied with it, and I enjoyed doing the one today. I think that the two people I did today were very important to rock music in general and overall. So for my honorable mentions, so I've got a list of 9. I could have easily doubled that, but I wanted to keep it to 9 today. So I chose Mick Karn of Japan, Steve Prestwich of Cold Steel and Little River Band, of course, Mike Starr of Alice in Chains, Scott Columbus, I think that's it. Maybe I got it wrong. Scott Columbus of Man of War, Clarence Clemens, of course, of Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band, Amy Winehouse, a solo artist who I think was fairly influential in her genre, David Honeyboy Edwards. Now, I chose him because not only was he a blues great, but he may be the oldest person that I've done on this chart. He died at the age of 96. That's got to be the oldest so far. John Ducan of Atomic Rooster, and then Jim Sherwood of the Mothers of Invention. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was fun to make. We'll have another one coming up on Monday. Yeah, Monday morning there'll be one out, and I hope you like and subscribe. And I've been recently doing fairly well with these things. The week rest off helped with a couple things. It got me to think more about what I was doing and to try and organize it better and to present it in a much better form. And I think I've done that. And not so much the reading part and not yawning as much, and just trying to reorganize the whole thing so that it's more entertaining, more informative, and gets to the part that we really like, which is talking about musicians and rock music in general. So there you have it. I hope you enjoy it. Please like, subscribe, and have a good evening, and enjoy this video too. Prog Monster out. Bye.